In our modern world of blue light, smartphone notifications, and 24/7 productivity demands, quality sleep has become something of a holy grail. We invest in memory foam mattresses, white noise machines, blackout curtains, and sleep tracking apps, all in pursuit of that elusive perfect night's rest. Yet despite our technological advantages, insomnia rates continue to climb, with approximately 30% of adults reporting short-term sleep issues and 10% suffering from chronic sleep disorders. What if the answer to our sleep woes isn't found in the latest sleep gadget or pharmaceutical innovation, but rather in the seemingly primitive practices of our medieval ancestors? This might sound counterintuitive. After all, medieval times are often portrayed as the Dark Ages, a period of hardship, discomfort, and intellectual stagnation. How could people who lived without indoor plumbing, central heating, or memory foam possibly have enjoyed better sleep than we do with all our modern comforts? Yet a growing body of historical research and sleep science suggests that medieval Europeans may have experienced some of the most natural, restorative sleep patterns in human history. Their sleep wasn't disrupted by artificial light, regulated by strict schedules, or shortened by digital distractions. Instead, it followed natural rhythms aligned with the sun and seasons, incorporated restful practices developed over centuries, and existed within a cultural framework that valued proper rest as essential to health and well-being. As Roger E. Kirch, historian and author of At Day's Close, Night in Times Past, discovered through his groundbreaking research, many of our current sleep problems may have roots in the dramatic changes to sleep patterns that came with industrialization and electrification. The medieval approach to sleep was fundamentally different, and in many ways superior to our own. In this exploration of medieval slumber, we'll journey through the bedchambers, peasant cottages, and monastery dormitories of medieval Europe to uncover the forgotten wisdom of our ancestors' sleep habits. From their biphasic sleep patterns to their communal sleeping arrangements, from their natural bedding materials to their herbal sleep remedies, we'll discover how medieval people cultivated sleep practices that modern science is only now beginning to recognise as optimal for human health. So pull up a chair by the hearth fire and prepare for a journey through time to discover how people in medieval times, from humble peasants to wealthy nobles, enjoyed what might have been the best sleep in human history. Perhaps the most distinctive feature of medieval sleep, and one that modern sleep researchers find increasingly fascinating, was its biphasic pattern. Unlike our modern ideal of a single, uninterrupted 8-hour block of sleep, medieval people typically divided their night into 2 distinct sleep periods separated by a period of peaceful wakefulness. This practice, often called segmented or biphasic sleep, wasn't considered unusual or problematic. It was simply the natural way humans slept before artificial lighting changed our relationship with darkness. As the sun set and darkness enveloped medieval communities, people would retire to bed shortly after dusk, especially in winter when nights were long. After sleeping for approximately 4 hours, what they called first sleep or prime sleep, they would wake around midnight for a period of 1 to 2 hours before returning to their second sleep until dawn. The evidence for this sleep pattern appears throughout medieval literature, medical texts, and personal correspondence. The 15th century medical text, Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, advises 6 hours of sleep for a man, 7 for a woman, and 8 for no one, suggesting that the total amount of sleep was distributed differently than our modern conception. In Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, characters frequently reference waking in the middle of the night as a normal occurrence, not as insomnia or sleep disturbance. A particularly illuminating example comes from a 15th century French physician's manual, which instructs patients to spend the first hours of sleep lying on their right side, then after waking, to lie on their left side for the second sleep period. This casual reference to middle of the night waking reveals how thoroughly normalised the biphasic pattern was. What did medieval people do during this midnight interval? Far from considering it a nuisance, they embraced this peaceful interlude as a valuable part of their daily rhythm. Court records, diaries, and literary works from the period describe a range of activities that took place during this wakeful period. Many used the time for prayer and reflection. The medieval day was structured around canonical hours, with night offices, matins and lauds, falling during this middle-of-the-night period. Monks would rise for these prayers, but even ordinary lay people often used this time for private devotion. The silence and darkness created ideal conditions for contemplation and what they called attending to the soul. For married couples, this midnight waking offered a rare opportunity for private conversation, away from the bustle of daytime activities and the presence of others in often crowded living quarters. Medical texts from the period suggest this was also considered an optimal time for conception, with the body believed to be most rested and receptive. Others used the time for more practical pursuits. Peasants might check on livestock or newborn animals, while craftspeople sometimes used the quiet hours to plan their next day's work. Some simply enjoyed the peaceful stillness, sitting by the dying embers of the hearth fire, perhaps drinking a small amount of ale or herbal tea. Alvise Cornaro, a Venetian nobleman who lived in the late medieval period and wrote about health and longevity, noted, "The night's waking is not to be feared, but embraced as a natural separation of slumbers. In this quiet hour, the mind finds clarity that daylight often obscures." What medieval people knew intuitively, modern science is now rediscovering. In a groundbreaking experiment conducted in the 1990s, psychiatrist Thomas Weir placed volunteers in an environment with 14 hours of darkness each day for several weeks. Without modern lighting to extend their waking hours, the participants naturally began to sleep in a biphasic pattern remarkably similar to that described in medieval texts. A first sleep of about 4 hours, followed by 1 to 2 hours of wakefulness, then a second sleep until morning. During the waking interval, Weir's subjects reported unusual calmness and clarity of thought, along with elevated levels of prolactin, a hormone associated with relaxation. This hormonal state may explain why medieval people found this midnight waking so conducive to meditation, prayer, and intimate conversation. Neuroscientist Matthew Walker, author of Why We Sleep, suggests that this biphasic pattern might be more aligned with our natural circadian rhythms than our modern consolidated sleep. There's evidence that this segmented sleep pattern allows for more efficient cycling through sleep stages, particularly deep slow-wave sleep and REM sleep, which are crucial for memory consolidation and emotional regulation, Walker explains. Some sleep researchers now believe that our modern expectation of uninterrupted sleep may actually contribute to sleep anxiety. When we wake in the middle of the night and cannot immediately fall back asleep, we often experience stress about losing sleep, a concern that would have been foreign to medieval sleepers who expected and valued their midnight waking. As we struggle with rising rates of insomnia and sleep disorders, perhaps the medieval biphasic sleep pattern offers a more natural alternative to our rigid modern ideal of 8 uninterrupted hours. By embracing the historical norm of segmented sleep, we might not only improve our sleep quality, but also reclaim that peaceful midnight interval our ancestors so valued for reflection, connection, and tranquility. One of the most profound differences between medieval and modern sleep environments was the genuine darkness that enveloped medieval communities after sunset. Without electricity, streetlights, or the omnipresent glow of digital screens, medieval people experienced darkness in its purest form. A darkness that modern urban and suburban dwellers can scarcely imagine. This natural darkness played a crucial role in regulating medieval sleep patterns. The human body produces melatonin, our primary sleep hormone, in response to darkness, and suppresses it in the presence of light, particularly blue light. Medieval people's exposure to true darkness triggered robust melatonin production, signalling to their bodies that it was time to sleep. The medieval day was naturally synchronized with the sun's movement, as Johannes de Sacrobosco, a 13th century scholar, wrote in his astronomical treatise De Sphæra Mundi. The day follows the sun, and man must follow the day, for this is the order of nature. This wasn't merely philosophical musing, it was practical reality. When darkness fell, activities requiring visual acuity necessarily ceased or changed character. In winter, when darkness might last 14 to 16 hours in Northern Europe, people typically spent significantly more time in bed than we do today, sometimes up to 9 to 10 hours, though not all of it sleeping, as we've seen with their biphasic pattern. This seasonal variation in sleep duration aligned perfectly with the body's natural tendencies to sleep longer in winter months, a pattern that modern research has confirmed is biologically programmed. This is not to say medieval people lived in complete darkness after sunset. They did have artificial lighting, but it was dim, expensive, and used judiciously. Tallow candles made from animal fat were the most common light source for ordinary households, but they produced smoky, odorous light and were used sparingly due to cost. Beeswax candles offered cleaner, brighter light, but were prohibitively expensive for all but the wealthy and the church. Rushlights, made by soaking the pithy centre of rushes in animal fat, provided an economical alternative, but burned quickly and gave minimal illumination. Oil lamps using olive oil or other vegetable oils were common in Mediterranean regions, but less so in Northern Europe, where such oils were expensive imports. The result was that even when artificial light was used, it created what we might call a light footprint, dramatically different from our modern environment. Illumination was localized, flickering, and amber-hued, precisely the wavelengths that least interfere with melatonin production. As one 15th century English household account book noted, 1 pound of candles to last the week, a quantity that would provide only minimal lighting for essential activities. The archaeological record supports this limited use of artificial light. Excavations of medieval homes show that candle holders and lamps were relatively few in number and positioned strategically for specific tasks. Unlike our modern homes with multiple light sources in every room, medieval lighting was functional and minimal. Modern sleep science has confirmed what medieval people experienced intuitively. Darkness is essential for quality sleep. Studies show that even moderate light exposure during sleep, such as that from a television or street lamp filtering through curtains, can suppress melatonin by up to 50%, reducing sleep quality and potentially contributing to various health problems. Dr. Charles Czeisler of Harvard Medical School, who studies circadian rhythms, explains, "Light is the most powerful synchronizer of our biological clock. The artificial extension of daylight has fundamentally altered our sleep biology in ways we're only beginning to understand." The medieval experience of darkness offered several advantages for sleep quality. First, the gradual dimming of natural light at sunset provided a natural transition period that signalled to the body it was time to prepare for sleep. Unlike our modern habit of exposure to bright screens until moments before bed, medieval people experienced a gentle diminishing of light that allowed melatonin to rise naturally. Second, the profound darkness of the medieval night promoted deeper sleep stages. Research has shown that even small amounts of light can prevent sleepers from reaching the deepest, most restorative phases of sleep. Medieval sleepers, enveloped in genuine darkness, likely achieved more consistent deep sleep than their modern counterparts. Third, the seasonal variation in light exposure helped maintain robust circadian rhythms. Medieval people experienced significant differences in day length between summer and winter, which helped reinforce their body's internal clock. Modern research suggests this seasonal variation in light exposure plays an important role in hormonal regulation and metabolic health. The 13th century Persian physician Qusta ibn Luqa captured this understanding in his treatise On the Difference Between Spirit and Soul, writing, "Sleep comes most naturally in darkness, for light keeps the spirits active and moving outward through the body, while darkness allows them to retreat inward, bringing rest." In our quest for better sleep, modern sleep specialists now often recommend bedroom hygiene practices that would have been second nature to medieval people, eliminating light sources, using dim, warm lighting in the hours before bed, and creating a sleep environment as dark as possible. Some even suggest occasional darkness retreats, spending a weekend with minimal artificial light to reset circadian rhythms disrupted by our illuminated modern world. Perhaps in our brilliantly lit 21st century, we could learn from the medieval embrace of darkness as an essential component of healthy sleep. One of the most striking differences between medieval and modern sleep practices was the communal nature of sleep. While contemporary Western culture prizes private bedrooms and individual beds, medieval people rarely slept alone. From humble peasant cottages to grand noble households, shared sleeping spaces were the norm rather than the exception. In peasant homes, the entire family typically slept in a single room, often the main living area of the house. Parents, children, and sometimes extended family members or servants would share not just the same room, but frequently the same bed, a practice that continued well into the early modern period. As the 16th century English agriculturalist Thomas Tusser noted in his 500 Points of Good Husbandry, "Where children in one bed do lie, they learn to sweat, to quarrel, and to cry." Even in wealthier households with more space, communal sleeping remained common. Household accounts from 15th century English manors show that servants typically slept in groups of 2 to 4 per bed. The 1465 Household Ordinance of Edward IV specified that 5 yeomen of the crown should share one bed and one chamber. For nobles and royalty, sleeping was paradoxically both more private and more public. While they might have their own bed, they rarely slept truly alone. Ladies in waiting or gentlemen of the bedchamber would sleep in the same room, often on trundle beds that could be rolled under the main bed during the day. The ritual of the royal coucher, bedtime and lever, rising, in courts across Europe, involved attendants helping the monarch to bed and witnessing their rising, making even sleep a semi-public affair for the highest ranks of society. Far from viewing this arrangement as an unfortunate necessity, medieval culture embedded communal sleeping in its social fabric as a positive practice. Sharing sleep space created bonds of trust and intimacy between family members, servants, and even business associates. Medieval guild records show that apprentices typically slept in the same room, or even bed as their masters, creating a relationship that blended professional training with familial closeness. This communal approach to sleep provided psychological benefits that modern sleep researchers are only beginning to appreciate. The presence of trusted others during the vulnerable state of sleep created a sense of security that may have reduced anxiety and promoted deeper rest. Anthropological studies of traditional societies that maintain communal sleeping practices show lower rates of sleep-onset insomnia than in cultures where solitary sleeping is the norm. Medieval literature reflects this understanding of sleep as a social activity. In Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, the sharing of sleeping quarters among the pilgrims is presented as natural and unremarkable. When the wife of Bath describes sharing a bed with her various husbands, the focus is on their relationship dynamics, not on any perceived strangeness of the sleeping arrangement itself. Even monastic communities, despite their emphasis on individual spiritual development, incorporated communal sleeping. The rule of St. Benedict, which governed Benedictine monasteries throughout medieval Europe, specified that monks shall sleep in separate beds, but in one place, with the dormitory arranged so that the younger brothers sleep next to their elders, who could provide guidance and oversight. Beyond the psychological comfort, communal sleeping offered practical advantages in the medieval context. Shared body heat was an important consideration in unheated or minimally heated homes during cold winter nights. A 15th century English household manual advises, "In winter, let children sleep together for warmth, but in summer, separate them if space allows, for coolness and health." The presence of others also provided security in an era before locks were common on interior doors. Household accounts from medieval estates frequently mention payment for night watchmen, but for most ordinary people, safety during vulnerable sleeping hours came from the presence of family members and the strength of community bonds. For nursing mothers, sleeping near their infants facilitated nighttime feeding and monitoring, a practice supported by modern research on mother-infant co-sleeping. Medieval medical texts like the 12th century Trotula collection of women's medicine recommended that infants sleep near their mothers for both practical care and emotional well-being. As we've moved toward increasingly private sleeping arrangements in modern times, some sleep researchers question whether we've lost something valuable. Anthropologist James McKenna, who studies mother-infant co-sleeping, suggests that solitary sleep is a recent and untested innovation in human history, and that some sleep problems may stem from this departure from evolutionary norms. The medieval practice of communal sleeping reminds us that sleep is not merely a biological necessity, but also a social activity embedded in cultural contexts. While few modern people would choose to return to the crowded sleeping arrangements of medieval cottages, we might consider how the social aspects of sleep, the sense of security, connection, and shared experience, contribute to restful nights. Some contemporary sleep therapies now incorporate elements reminiscent of medieval practices. Weighted blankets, which simulate the pressure of another person's presence, have gained popularity for treating insomnia and anxiety. And for couples, research suggests that synchronized sleep, going to bed and waking together, improves relationship satisfaction and may enhance sleep quality for both partners. Perhaps the medieval understanding of sleep as a shared, communal experience rather than a solitary retreat offers valuable insights for our increasingly isolated modern lives. When modern people imagine medieval beds, they often picture uncomfortable straw pallets on hard wooden platforms, a far cry from our plush memory, foam mattresses, and Egyptian cotton sheets. This perception has fueled the assumption that medieval sleep must have been uncomfortable and therefore inferior to our own. However, historical evidence reveals a more nuanced reality. Medieval bedding was ingeniously designed to provide comfort using natural materials, and in some ways may have offered advantages over our modern synthetic alternatives. Medieval beds varied widely based on social status, from simple straw pallets used by peasants to the elaborate canopied beds of nobility. Yet across this spectrum, the fundamental materials remained remarkably similar. Plant fibres, straw, hay, or reeds formed the base layer, covered by wool or linen stuffed with feathers. Down or more wool for the mattress proper, topped with linen or wool sheets and wool blankets or fur coverlets. Household inventories provide detailed evidence of these sleeping arrangements. A 1378th inventory from the English Manor of Colic lists 1 featherbed, 2 mattresses stuffed with wool, 3 pairs of linen sheets, and 5 blankets of wool for the master bedroom. Even for servants, the same inventory notes straw pallets refreshed monthly, with wool coverlets and linen sheets changed at quarter days. Straw, far from being merely a poor substitute for modern mattress materials, offered several advantages as a bedding foundation. Fresh, dry straw provides excellent insulation from the cold ground or wooden bed platform, while simultaneously allowing air circulation that prevents overheating. A natural temperature regulating system. Medieval household manuals recommended changing straw bedding regularly, typically with the seasons. The 15th century housekeeping guide, Le Ménagier de Paris, advises refresh the straw at Michaelmas, late September, at All Saints, November 1st, at Candlemas, February 2nd, and at May Day, using wheat straw when available for its superior comfort and cleanliness. This regular replacement created naturally clean sleeping surfaces. Fresh straw contains silica and natural compounds that repel insects and mites, a natural defense against bed bugs and other pests that plague even modern mattresses. Archaeological evidence from medieval waste pits shows that discarded bedding straw was often remarkably free of the insect remains that would indicate infestation. The slight crinkly texture of straw beds, while unfamiliar to modern sleepers accustomed to uniform surfaces, may have provided ergonomic benefits. Dr. James Levine, an endocrinologist who studies physical activity, suggests that slight irregularity in sleeping surfaces can prevent pressure points and promote subtle position changes during sleep, potentially reducing joint stiffness and improving circulation. Above the straw foundation, medieval beds featured mattresses and bedding made from wool, linen and feathers, natural materials with remarkable temperature-regulating properties. Wool in particular excels at moisture management, absorbing up to 30% of its weight in moisture without feeling wet and releasing it gradually as ambient humidity changes. This property made wool bedding ideal for regulating body temperature throughout the night. Modern sleep research confirms that maintaining optimal sleep temperature, typically between 60 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 to 19 degrees Celsius, is crucial for quality sleep, particularly for achieving deep slow-wave sleep phases. Wool's natural ability to buffer temperature fluctuations may have helped medieval sleepers maintain this optimal range, despite living in environments without central heating or air conditioning. Linen sheets made from flax fibres offered similar benefits. Linen wicks moisture away from the body more effectively than cotton and becomes stronger when wet. It also contains natural antibacterial properties that helped keep medieval bedding hygienic, despite less frequent washing than modern standards would dictate. A 14th century English household account notes payment for washing of linen sheets quarterly, suggesting that while laundering was less frequent than modern practice, it was regular enough to maintain cleanliness. For those who could afford them, feather beds provided luxurious comfort. The best were made with eiderdown or goose feathers, creating a sleeping surface that conformed to the body while providing insulation. The 1415 will of Alice de Brienne, an English noblewoman, specifically bequeaths "my best feather bed with bolsters and pillows" to her daughter, indicating the value placed on quality bedding. Medieval bedding incorporated another element largely absent from modern sleep environments: aromatic herbs. Herbs like lavender, chamomile, sweet woodruff, and rose petals were commonly strewn among straw or sewn into small sachets placed within bedding. Far from being merely decorative or used to mask odours, these herbs had genuine sleep-enhancing properties, now confirmed by modern science. Lavender, the most commonly used bedding herb, has been shown in contemporary research to reduce anxiety and improve sleep quality. A 2014 study published in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine found that lavender essential oil increased slow-wave sleep patterns, precisely the deep, restorative sleep stage most crucial for physical recovery. Medieval medical texts recognized these benefits empirically. The 12th century Circa Instans, a pharmaceutical compendium, recommends lavender to comfort the brain and induce restful sleep. Archaeological evidence from cesspits and middens confirms the widespread use of these herbs, with plant remains of sleep-promoting herbs frequently found mixed with discarded bedding straw. The physical arrangement of medieval beds also influenced sleep quality. Rather than lying completely flat as modern sleepers typically do, medieval people often slept in a more reclined position, with the upper body slightly elevated on bolsters or pillows stuffed with wool, feathers, or dried herbs. This semi-reclined position, which medieval physicians recommended for better digestion and breathing, aligns with modern findings about optimal sleep posture. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Gastroenterology suggests that sleeping with the upper body slightly elevated can reduce acid reflux and improve breathing for those with sleep apnea or respiratory conditions. Medieval illustrations consistently show sleepers in this gently reclined posture, and surviving bed frames from the period often have headboards designed to support pillows and bolsters at this angle. The 15th century physician Aldobrandino of Siena advised in his Régime du Corps that the head should be somewhat higher than the feet, but not so much as to strain the neck or back. The natural materials of medieval bedding offer insights for contemporary sleep quality. Modern research increasingly recognises the drawbacks of synthetic bedding materials, which can trap heat and moisture, harbour dust mites, and off-gas volatile organic compounds that disrupt sleep. The revival of natural bedding materials, wool mattress toppers, linen sheets, buckwheat or lavender-filled pillows, reflects a growing recognition that our ancestors may have understood something fundamental about sleep comfort that we've forgotten in our rush to embrace synthetic alternatives. As sleep researcher Dr. Chris Winter notes, there's a growing appreciation that the simplicity of natural fibres, their breathability, moisture management, and temperature regulation may offer advantages over high-tech alternatives for creating the optimal sleep environment. While few would trade their modern mattress for a medieval straw pallet, the principles behind medieval bedding, natural materials, regular refreshment, aromatic enhancements, and ergonomic positioning offer valuable lessons for improving our own sleep environments. Perhaps one of the most enviable aspects of medieval sleep was the absence of jarring alarm clocks. Instead of being startled awake by electronic beeping or smartphone alarms, medieval people typically awoke naturally with the rising sun, or were gently roused by environmental cues that worked in harmony with their body's natural rhythms. This doesn't mean medieval people lacked time awareness or schedules. Their days followed structured patterns, but these were marked by more gradual and natural transitions than our abrupt modern awakenings. The primary timekeeper in medieval communities was the church bell, which rang to mark canonical hours, the religious observances that divided the day into approximately 3-hour segments. Unlike the sudden intrusion of modern alarms, church bells created a soundscape that medieval people incorporated into their consciousness even during sleep. The bells for prime, early morning, around 6 a.m, or lauds, dawn, served as gentle reminders that the day was beginning, allowing sleepers to gradually transition to wakefulness as the bells echoed through the community. As Robert of Brunn wrote in his 14th century Handling Sin, "The bells that call to morning prayer wake not with sudden clamour, but ring as though to remind the soul that day approaches." This poetic description captures the fundamentally different experience of waking in medieval times, not as an abrupt interruption of sleep, but as a mindful transition between states. More important than bells for regulating sleep was natural light. Medieval homes, with their unblocked windows, often covered with oiled parchment or cloth rather than glass, allowed dawn light to gradually filter into sleeping areas. This increasing light naturally suppressed melatonin production and stimulated cortisol release, the exact hormonal shift that prepares the body to wake refreshed. Modern sleep science confirms that this gradual light exposure is the optimal way to wake. Studies show that awakening to gradually increasing light allows the body to complete sleep cycles naturally and transition through the lighter stages of sleep before full wakefulness. This prevents the sleep inertia, that groggy, disoriented feeling, that often follows alarm-triggered waking. Dr. Kenneth Wright, director of the Sleep and Chronobiology Laboratory at the University of Colorado Boulder, found that subjects exposed to natural light cycles wake more easily and report better morning alertness than those using artificial lighting and alarms. The body is designed to respond to the gradual increase in light intensity that occurs at dawn, Wright explains. This triggers a cascade of hormonal changes that prepare us to wake naturally. Medieval sleepers, with their seasonal adjustments to bedtimes and wake times, naturally aligned their sleep with these light patterns. In summer, with earlier dawns, they might rise as early as 4:30 or 5 a.m, while winter might see them sleeping until 7 a.m. or later. A natural seasonal variation largely lost in our electrically illuminated world. Beyond bells and natural light, medieval communities had other gentle wake-up methods. For rural households, roosters provided reliable morning alerts, crowing with the first light of dawn. Unlike the sudden jolt of an electronic alarm, the rooster's crow typically begins softly and increases in volume, creating a more gradual awakening stimulus. In towns and larger households, human wake-up calls were common. Large manors and monasteries employed a designated person to rouse sleepers for the day's activities or prayers. These wake-up calls often included practical information about the day ahead or weather conditions, helping sleepers transition mentally as well as physically into wakefulness. The rule of St. Benedict, which governed monastic life throughout medieval Europe, specified that monks should be awakened by a designated brother who would make the signal and announce the hour. This human element added a social dimension to waking that is absent from our interaction with electronic alarms. Even in ordinary households, family members would gently wake one another, particularly in winter when dawn came later. Household manuals advised that the first person to wake should stir up the fire and then gently rouse others. The 15th century poem, How the Good Wife Taught Her Daughter, instructs, "Rise betimes in the morn, wake your fellows all, and be the first up to kindle the fire in the hall." Without the strict schedules of modern work life, medieval mornings unfolded more gradually. The transition from sleep to full activity typically included intermediate stages: tending the fire, breaking the night's fast with a simple meal, performing religious devotions, before beginning the day's labour. This gradual transition allowed the body and mind to align naturally with active wakefulness. Medical texts from the period recommended this gradual approach to morning. The influential 12th century medical school of Salerno advised in its health regimen, "Rise from sleep, leisurely and slowly. Violent movements after rest are harmful." This advice aligns with modern understanding of sleep inertia, which can impair cognitive and physical performance if not allowed to dissipate naturally. The medieval morning lacked the frantic rush that characterises many modern households. Without commutes to distant workplaces, medieval people typically lived where they worked, whether on farms, in craft workshops attached to homes, or in manors where service was performed. This integration of living and working spaces eliminated the need for hurried preparation and travel that disrupts so many modern mornings. Another significant advantage of medieval sleep patterns was the acceptance of napping as a normal part of daily life, particularly during summer when daylight extended well into the evening. Midday rest periods, especially after the largest meal of the day, which was typically eaten around noon, allowed for adjustment of sleep timing based on natural needs rather than rigid schedules. Agricultural manuals and household accounts frequently mention the meridian sleep, or midday rest, particularly during the harvest season, when work days were longest. The 13th century agricultural treatise, Fleta, notes that during summer harvesting, workers should rest at midday when the heat is greatest, before returning to work until evening. This flexibility allowed medieval people to compensate for shortened night sleep when necessary and to adjust their sleep patterns seasonally. Modern sleep research increasingly recognises the benefits of such adaptability, with studies showing that short daytime naps can improve cognitive performance, mood, and alertness without disrupting nighttime sleep. The medieval approach to waking offers several valuable insights for improving modern sleep transitions. First, the gradual awakening process, whether facilitated by increasing natural light, gentle sounds, or human interaction, aligns better with our biology than abrupt alarm interruptions. Some modern sleep researchers now recommend dawn simulator alarms that gradually increase light levels to mimic sunrise, or smart alarms that detect sleep phases and wake users during lighter sleep stages. These technologies attempt to recreate what was natural for medieval sleepers. Second, the more flexible timing of medieval sleep, adjusting seasonally and incorporating naps when needed, may be healthier than our rigid adherence to fixed sleep schedules, regardless of season or circumstance. Chronobiologists increasingly advocate for circadian awareness in scheduling sleep, acknowledging that natural sleep timing may vary throughout the year. Finally, the less rushed transition from sleep to activity, allowing time for natural awakening and gradual engagement with the day, may reduce stress and improve morning well-being. As sleep physician Dr. Michael Bruce suggests, the first hour after waking sets the tone for the entire day. A rushed awakening triggers stress hormones that can persist for hours. While modern obligations may not allow for the more natural waking patterns of medieval times, understanding the principles behind them can help us design better transitions between sleep and wakefulness, perhaps one of the most valuable sleep lessons our medieval ancestors have to offer. Long before pharmaceutical sleep aids lined pharmacy shelves, medieval people relied on a sophisticated pharmacopoeia of herbal remedies to address sleep difficulties. Far from being mere folk remedies based on superstition, many of these plant-based sleep aids have been validated by modern scientific research, confirming what medieval herbalists knew through careful observation and centuries of practical experience. Medieval sleep remedies were documented in various medical texts and herbals, illustrated manuscripts detailing the medicinal properties of plants. Among the most influential were the works of Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century German Benedictine abbess whose Physica and Causae et Curae detailed hundreds of medicinal plants, including many specifically recommended for sleep. These herbal sleep aids were typically administered as teas, referred to as pâtissanes or decoctions, syrups or ingredients in evening meals. Unlike modern sleeping pills designed to forcefully induce unconsciousness, medieval remedies generally worked more gently, addressing the underlying causes of sleeplessness, anxiety, digestive discomfort or physical pain, while promoting natural relaxation. The most commonly prescribed medieval sleep herbs included Valerian Valeriana officinalis, called Amantia or Setwal in medieval texts. Valerian root was the medieval equivalent of modern Valium, a powerful relaxant used for perturbations of the mind and wakefulness in the night hours. The 9th century medical text from the Schola Medica Salernitana recommends valerian for those whose minds are troubled and whose sleep flees from them. Modern research confirms valerian's effectiveness, with studies showing it reduces sleep latency, the time it takes to fall asleep, and improves sleep quality through interaction with GABA receptors in the brain, similar to the mechanism of many prescription sleep medications but without their side effects. Chamomile matricaria, chamomilla. This gentle herb was specifically recommended for sleep difficulties stemming from anxiety or digestive upset. The influential 16th century herbalist John Gerard wrote that chamomile procureth sleep and is especially useful for such as are troubled with the frenzies and lack of sleep. Contemporary studies have identified apigenin, a flavonoid in chamomile, as the compound responsible for its mild sedative and anxiolytic effects. Lettuce Lactuca sativa. While modern lettuce varieties have been bred to reduce bitterness, medieval lettuce contained higher concentrations of lactucin and lactocopacrine, compounds with demonstrated sedative and analgesic properties. Medieval physicians like Avicenna recommended wild lettuce as a sleep aid, writing that it cools the mind and brings sleep. The 15th century Greta Herbal advised eating lettuce with evening meals to make one sleep well. Hops humulus, lupulus. Best known today as a beer ingredient, hops were recognised for their sedative properties long before their use in brewing became widespread. Hops pillows, small sachets filled with dried hops flowers placed inside pillowcases, were a common medieval sleep aid. The 12th century German abbess Hildegard of Bingen wrote that hops make the heart sad and weigh down the inner organs, recognising their depressant effect on the central nervous system. Modern research has identified the bitter acids in hops as compounds that increase GABA activity in the brain, producing sedation. Passion flower passiflora incarnata. Introduced to European medicine from the Americas in the late medieval period, passion flower quickly gained reputation as a remedy for restlessness and wakefulness. Modern studies confirm it increases levels of GABA in the brain, reducing neural activity and promoting relaxation. Beyond specific herbal remedies, medieval dietary practices included numerous foods believed to promote good sleep. Many of these connections between diet and sleep quality have been validated by contemporary nutritional science. Warm milk with honey was a common bedtime drink, often infused with sleep-promoting spices like nutmeg or cinnamon. Modern research confirms that the combination of milk's tryptophan, an amino acid precursor to sleep-inducing serotonin, and honey's small amount of glucose helps tryptophan cross the blood-brain barrier more effectively. Almonds and almond milk featured prominently in medieval bedtime preparations. The 14th century Forma of Cury, a collection of recipes from the court of Richard II, includes a bedtime drink of almond milk warmed with spices. Almonds are now known to be high in magnesium, a mineral that functions as a natural muscle relaxant and GABA promoter. Lettuce, particularly wild varieties, was often included in evening meals specifically for its sleep-promoting properties. The 15th century cookbook Le Viandier de Taillevent includes a recipe for lettuce prepared with nutmeg and other spices to be eaten at supper for good rest. Medieval sleep practices extended beyond ingested remedies to include aromatherapeutic approaches. Herbs like lavender, chamomile, and rose were commonly used to scent bedding and sleeping chambers, creating environments conducive to rest. The practice of strewing herbs on floors and between bedding layers served both practical purposes, repelling insects and masking odours, and therapeutic ones. The 14th century French physician Guy de Chauliac recommended in his Chirurgia Magna that, for those troubled in their sleep, let their chambers be perfumed with roses, violets and water lilies, which comfort the brain and induce rest. Archaeological evidence confirms these practices, with residue analysis of medieval bedding materials frequently revealing traces of aromatic herbs. Modern scientific research now validates the effectiveness of these aromatic sleep aids, with studies showing that lavender inhalation, for example, improves sleep quality and reduces anxiety through its effect on the limbic system. Medieval sleep medicine took a remarkably holistic approach to treating insomnia, recognizing different types of sleep disturbances and tailoring remedies accordingly. The influential 11th century Persian physician Avicenna ibn Sina classified insomnia by its causes, including mental agitation, pain, digestive issues, and environmental factors, and prescribed different treatments for each. For sleep problems stemming from mental agitation, or what we might now call anxiety, medieval physicians recommended calming herbs like lemon balm and chamomile, often combined with gentle physical therapies like head massages with rose oil or lavender. For insomnia caused by pain, treatments combined analgesic herbs like willow bark containing salicin, the natural precursor to aspirin, with sedative ones like hops or valerian. The 13th century Antidotarium Nicolai, a standard pharmaceutical reference, includes several compound preparations specifically for those who cannot sleep due to pains of the body. Digestive disturbances were treated with carminative herbs like fennel, anise, and mint, reflecting the medieval understanding of the connection between digestive comfort and sleep quality, a relationship confirmed by modern research on the gut-brain axis. What distinguished medieval herbal sleep remedies from many modern pharmaceutical approaches was their gentleness and focus on addressing underlying causes rather than forcefully inducing unconsciousness. While modern sleeping pills often produce a state that neurologically differs from natural sleep, medieval remedies generally worked by promoting the body's natural sleep mechanisms. Dr. Michael J. Bruce, a clinical psychologist and sleep specialist, notes, "Many of the herbs used in medieval sleep medicine work with the body's natural neurochemistry rather than overriding it. They tend to promote relaxation and address factors that interfere with sleep rather than knocking you out, which may explain why they typically produce fewer side effects than modern pharmaceuticals." This gentler approach meant that medieval sleep remedies rarely caused the morning grogginess, dependency, or rebound insomnia associated with many modern sleep medications. The herbs' multiple active compounds worked synergistically, often providing additional benefits beyond sleep promotion, such as mild pain relief or digestive support. As modern medicine increasingly recognizes the limitations and side effects of pharmaceutical sleep aids, interest in these traditional, plant-based approaches has grown. Many of the herbs central to medieval sleep medicine, valerian, chamomile, passion flower, and hops, are now being studied in clinical trials, with results often confirming what medieval herbalists knew through centuries of observation and experience. Perhaps our medieval ancestors, with their extensive knowledge of plant medicine and holistic approach to sleep, offer valuable lessons for addressing our modern epidemic of sleep disorders, not with stronger pharmaceuticals, but with gentle, natural remedies that work in harmony with the body's innate sleep mechanisms. The medieval approach to food, when, what, and how much people ate, played a crucial role in their superior sleep quality. Unlike our modern habit of late dinners and midnight snacks, medieval meal timing aligned naturally with circadian rhythms in ways that modern nutritional science now recognizes as optimal for both digestive health and sleep quality. The typical medieval day centered around two main meals: dinner, the largest meal served around midday, typically between 10 a.m. and noon, and supper, a lighter meal taken in the early evening before sunset. This pattern, heaviest food consumption during daylight hours and lighter eating as evening approached, perfectly matches the body's natural metabolic rhythms. As the 13th century health manual, Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, advised, eat well at midday, sparingly at night, for great suppers bring great harm and make the night uncomfortable. This wisdom has been validated by modern chronobiology, which has identified that insulin sensitivity and metabolic efficiency peak earlier in the day and decline toward evening. Dr. Sachin Panda, a leading researcher in circadian biology at the Salk Institute, explains, the body processes food differently depending on the time of day. Eating in alignment with circadian rhythms, more calories earlier and fewer later, improves metabolic health and sleep quality. Medieval meal patterns intuitively followed this principle centuries before the science was understood. Medieval supper, typically eaten between 5 and 6 p.m, was deliberately lighter than the midday meal and carefully composed to promote good digestion and subsequent sleep. Household accounts and cookbooks from the period show that evening meals generally featured simpler preparations with fewer courses than the elaborate midday dinner. The 15th century household book of Dame Alice de Brienne records typical suppers consisting of bread, cheese, perhaps cold meats left from dinner, and seasonal fruits or preserves, a pattern remarkably similar to what modern nutritionists might recommend for an evening meal that won't disrupt sleep. Medical texts from the period explicitly connected evening meal composition with sleep quality. The influential 12th century physician Maimonides wrote in his Regimen of Health that one should not sleep until food has descended from the upper part of the stomach, and recommended a gap of at least 3 hours between eating and sleeping, advice that aligns perfectly with modern recommendations. For those who did experience hunger before bed, medieval physicians prescribed specific sleep-friendly foods. The 14th century French physician Bernard de Gordon recommended in his Lilium Medicinae that, if hunger prevents sleep, take a small piece of bread soaked in diluted wine or almond milk with honey, for these satisfy hunger without burdening digestion. The medieval diet naturally included many foods now recognised for their sleep-promoting properties. Their evening meals often featured milk and dairy products. Warm milk, sometimes mixed with honey or spices, was a common evening drink. Modern research confirms that milk contains tryptophan and calcium, both of which aid sleep through different mechanisms. Almonds and other nuts. Frequently used in medieval cooking, especially for evening dishes, almonds are rich in magnesium and tryptophan. The 14th century cookbook Le Ménagier de Paris includes recipes for almond milk, specifically recommended for the evening meal. Lettuce and leafy greens. As mentioned earlier, wild lettuce varieties contain natural sedatives. Medieval kitchen gardens typically included these and other sleep-promoting greens, like purslane, which contains melatonin, and borage, which has mild calming properties. Whole grains. The coarser bread consumed in medieval times provided complex carbohydrates that release glucose slowly throughout the night, preventing the blood sugar drops that can disrupt sleep. Barley, a common grain in medieval diets, contains notable amounts of melatonin and selenium, both beneficial for sleep. Fruits like cherries. Medieval orchards commonly grew sour cherries, now known to be one of the few natural food sources of melatonin. The 15th century Book of Carving recommends cherries as a good conclusion to the evening meal. Another aspect of medieval eating patterns that likely benefited sleep was the regular practice of fasting. Religious observances required numerous fast days throughout the year. Not just the 40 days of Lent, but also weekly fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays, plus vigils before major feast days. On these fast days, the evening meal would be particularly light or skipped entirely. Modern research on intermittent fasting suggests that these regular periods of digestive rest improve metabolic flexibility and may enhance sleep quality by reducing inflammation and allowing more resources to be directed toward restorative processes during sleep. The practice of collation, a small evening refreshment permitted on fast days, typically consisting of bread and watered wine or a simple fruit, closely resembles what sleep nutritionists now recommend as an ideal pre-sleep snack when needed: small, balanced, and easily digestible. Medieval diets followed seasonal availability much more strictly than our modern globalized food system allows. This seasonality meant that diet naturally shifted throughout the year in ways that complemented changing sleep patterns. In winter, when nights were longer and people typically spent more time in bed, medieval diets included more preserved meats, root vegetables, and hearty grains, foods that provided sustained energy through the longer nights. The higher fat content of winter diets also supported the production of hormones, including those that regulate sleep. Summer diets featured more fresh fruits, vegetables, and herbs, many with natural cooling properties that helped counteract the sleep-disrupting effects of heat. The 12th century abbess and medical writer Hildegard of Bingen specifically recommended summer evening meals include cooling foods like lettuce, purslane, and berries to calm the heat of the blood and prepare the body for restful sleep. Medieval people were cautious about consuming large amounts of liquid before bed, understanding intuitively what modern sleep medicine confirms: that nighttime awakenings for urination disrupt sleep cycles and reduce overall sleep quality. Instead of drinking water with meals, a practice generally avoided in medieval dining, they consumed small amounts of watered wine or ale with supper. These beverages were much lower in alcohol content than modern equivalents, typically 2 to 4% alcohol by volume, and were often infused with herbs that supported digestion and sleep. The 13th century Taquinum Sanitatis, a medieval health handbook, notes that a small amount of diluted wine with supper aids digestion without causing one to rise in the night, reflecting an understanding of the balance between proper hydration and sleep continuity. For those who did drink before bed, medieval physicians recommended specific beverages. A popular evening drink was posset, warm milk curdled with ale or wine, and often flavoured with sleep-promoting spices like nutmeg. Modern research suggests that the combination of the milk's tryptophan with the small amount of alcohol might indeed promote drowsiness without the sleep-disrupting effects of larger alcohol quantities. The medieval approach to meal timing and composition offers valuable insights for improving modern sleep through dietary adjustments. First, the practice of eating the largest meal at midday rather than evening aligns with our body's natural metabolic rhythms. Studies show that identical meals consumed at different times have different metabolic impacts, with evening consumption more likely to disrupt sleep and contribute to weight gain. Second, the lighter, simpler evening meals favoured in medieval times reduce the digestive burden during sleep, allowing the body to direct more energy toward restorative processes rather than digestion. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine found that higher fat consumption near bedtime was associated with less restorative slow-wave sleep. Third, the natural inclusion of sleep-promoting foods in the evening meal, dairy, nuts, certain fruits and vegetables, provided natural compounds that support the sleep cycle without the side effects of modern sleep medications. Finally, The medieval practice of allowing several hours between the evening meal and bedtime, what we might now call intermittent fasting, has been shown to improve both sleep quality and metabolic health. As nutritional psychiatrist Dr. Uma Naidu observes, the medieval approach to eating, larger meals earlier, lighter meals later, and a natural inclusion of foods rich in sleep-promoting nutrients, represents an intuitive understanding of chrononutrition that modern science is only now rediscovering. By reconnecting with these time-tested eating patterns, we might reclaim some of the sleep quality that our medieval ancestors enjoyed as a natural consequence of their food culture. Daily movement as a way of life. One of the most significant differences between medieval and modern lifestyles was the amount and type of physical activity integrated into daily life. Unlike our largely sedentary existence, punctuated by occasional gym visits, medieval people engaged in constant, varied physical activity as an inescapable part of their daily routine, creating ideal conditions for quality sleep. For the vast majority of medieval people, approximately 90% of whom were engaged in agricultural work, physical labour was inseparable from survival. Ploughing, sowing, harvesting, threshing, and milling required sustained exertion for many hours each day. Even outside the intensive periods of planting and harvest, farm life demanded continuous physical work, tending animals, maintaining buildings, gathering firewood and hauling water. Urban craftspeople and tradespeople likewise engaged in physically demanding work. Blacksmiths, carpenters, stonemasons, and weavers performed labour that required both strength and endurance. Even seemingly less strenuous occupations like scribes involved more movement than their modern counterparts, as medieval workshops lacked the ergonomic chairs and stationary positions common to modern office work. This constant physical activity created ideal conditions for deep, restorative sleep. As sleep researcher Matthew Walker explains in Why We Sleep, physical activity is one of the most effective ways to improve sleep quality, particularly slow-wave sleep. The deepest, most restorative stage. It's not just about tiring the body. Exercise triggers molecular mechanisms that regulate our sleep-wake cycle. Natural timing of physical exertion. Beyond the sheer volume of physical activity, the timing of medieval exertion aligned perfectly with optimal sleep-wake cycles. Most work took place during daylight hours, with the most strenuous activities typically performed in the morning and early afternoon, when body temperature and coordination naturally peak. This pattern, vigorous activity during daylight followed by gradually decreasing exertion as evening approached, created an ideal physiological preparation for sleep. Modern research shows that exercise raises core body temperature, and the subsequent cooling process several hours later helps trigger sleepiness. The 14th century agricultural manual Seneschaltia. The office of seneschal instructs farm managers to arrange work so that the heaviest labours are done in the morning hours when men's strength is greatest, with less demanding tasks reserved for later in the day. This intuitive scheduling maximised both work efficiency and sleep quality. For those engaged in scholarly or religious life, physical activity remained an essential counterbalance to mental work. Monastic rules typically prescribed periods of manual labour even for those primarily engaged in intellectual pursuits. The rule of St. Benedict explicitly states that monks should divide their day between prayer, study, and physical work, recognising the importance of bodily exertion for overall well-being, including sleep. Medieval physical activity differed from modern exercise not just in quantity, but in quality. Rather than isolating specific muscle groups in repetitive movements, as many gym workouts do, medieval labour engaged the entire body in complex, varied patterns. Agricultural work required the full range of human movements: lifting, carrying, pulling, pushing, bending, twisting, and walking across uneven terrain. Craft production similarly involved diverse movements rather than the repetitive, limited motions characteristic of modern factory work or office tasks. This variety of movement patterns provided comprehensive muscular fatigue without the extreme exhaustion or repetitive strain that can actually interfere with sleep. Modern exercise physiologists increasingly recognize the value of functional fitness, varied practical movements that engage multiple muscle groups over isolated exercises, both for physical health and sleep quality. Archaeological evidence confirms the physical effects of this lifestyle. Skeletal remains from medieval cemeteries show distinctive muscle attachment patterns, indicating regular, strenuous physical activity beginning in childhood. These physical adaptations reflect bodies that were continuously active rather than sedentary, with occasional exercise, a fundamental difference from modern patterns. Beyond work-related exertion, medieval people walked extensively as their primary mode of transportation. Historical records indicate that daily walking distances of 5 to 10 miles were common for ordinary people, with longer journeys undertaken regularly for markets, religious pilgrimages, or seasonal work migration. The 15th century itineraries of William Way, which recorded typical travel times between English towns, shows that ordinary travellers routinely covered 15 to 20 miles per day on foot. For comparison, modern Americans average less than a quarter mile of walking daily. This regular walking had profound benefits for sleep quality. Modern research shows that walking, particularly outdoors in natural light, helps synchronize circadian rhythms, reduce stress hormones, and promote the physical fatigue necessary for deep sleep. Dr. Kelly Glazer Barron, a sleep researcher at the University of Utah, notes, "Walking is one of the most underrated sleep aids. It combines 3 elements critical for good sleep: physical activity, exposure to natural light, and often stress reduction through connection with the environment." Medieval work primarily took place outdoors or in workshops with ample natural light, a stark contrast to our modern existence in artificially lit environments. This extensive daylight exposure properly entrained circadian rhythms, the internal clocks that regulate sleep-wake cycles. Morning light exposure is particularly crucial for healthy sleep timing, as it suppresses melatonin production and signals to the body that it's time to be alert. Medieval agricultural workers and urban craftspeople typically began their day at dawn, receiving maximum benefit from early morning sunlight. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine shows that workers with regular exposure to daylight sleep an average of 46 minutes longer per night than those working in environments without natural light. Medieval people's constant exposure to the full spectrum of natural light, including the crucial blue wavelengths that most strongly influence circadian rhythms, created ideal conditions for properly timed, high-quality sleep. Medieval work patterns naturally adjusted with the seasons, another factor that likely benefited sleep quality. The agricultural calendar dictated varying levels of exertion throughout the year, with intense activity during planting and harvest seasons balanced by reduced workloads during winter months. This seasonal variation aligned with natural changes in sleep needs. Modern research suggests that humans, like many mammals, naturally tend toward slightly longer sleep during winter months when nights are longer. Medieval work patterns accommodated this tendency, with shorter work days during winter, allowing for extended sleep during the long nights. The 13th century agricultural treatise, Walter of Henley's Husbandry, explicitly acknowledges this seasonal variation, instructing that winter work days should last from sunrise until dusk, while summer work might extend from before dawn until after sunset, with a midday rest period during the hottest hours. Another significant difference between medieval and modern physical patterns was the absence of artificial stimulation late in the day. Without electric lighting, television, or digital devices, medieval people naturally reduced activity levels as darkness fell. Evening activities typically involved quiet, low-intensity pursuits by firelight, conversation, storytelling, simple handicrafts, or prayer. This gradual reduction in physical and mental stimulation created a natural transition to sleep that modern sleep hygiene experts now recommend, but that few people actually practice. The 15th century household book of Alice de Brienne records typical evening activities at her manor, as including quiet conversation, the reading of devotions, and the preparation of simple handwork, all calm activities compatible with the body's natural evening reduction in alertness. The medieval relationship between physical activity and sleep offers several valuable insights for improving modern sleep. First, regular moderate physical activity throughout the day appears more beneficial for sleep than the modern pattern of sedentary behaviour punctuated by intense exercise sessions. Studies show that consistent light to moderate activity distributed throughout the day may be more effective for sleep quality than isolated vigorous workouts. Second, the timing of physical activity matters. The medieval pattern of more intense exertion earlier in the day with gradually decreasing activity toward evening aligns with optimal circadian functioning. Modern research confirms that vigorous exercise too close to bedtime can delay sleep onset for some people. Third, natural light exposure during physical activity provides additional sleep benefits beyond the exercise itself. Morning walks or outdoor activities can help regulate sleep timing and improve sleep quality through both the physical exertion and the circadian entrainment effects of natural light. Finally, the seasonal adaptation of activity levels, working with rather than against the body's natural tendency towards slightly longer sleep in winter, may contribute to overall sleep health. Modern research on seasonal affective disorder suggests that acknowledging and accommodating these natural seasonal variations may benefit both mood and sleep. As exercise physiologist Dr. Stuart Phillips observes, the medieval pattern of consistent, varied, moderate physical activity throughout daylight hours, followed by reduced stimulation in the evening, creates nearly ideal conditions for quality sleep, something our modern exercise and activity patterns rarely achieve. By incorporating elements of this medieval approach to physical activity, more consistent movement throughout the day, proper timing relative to sleep, outdoor light exposure, and seasonal adaptation, modern people might reclaim some of the sleep benefits that came naturally to our medieval ancestors. Perhaps the most profound difference between medieval and modern sleep wasn't in the physical environment or daily practices, but in the fundamental attitude towards sleep itself. Unlike our productivity-obsessed culture that often views sleep as an inconvenient necessity to be minimized, medieval people generally regarded sleep as a divine gift and a natural pleasure to be appreciated. This perspective appears consistently in medieval texts across genres. Religious writings frequently described sleep as a blessing from God, with the psalmist's words, "He gives to his beloved sleep." Psalm 127 verse 2, often cited as evidence of sleep's sacred nature. Sleep was understood as a time when the body restored itself, while the soul remained in God's care. Even secular literature reflected this positive view of sleep. Chaucer's The Book of the Duchess describes sleep as the best thing of all, the best thing of all for both body and spirit. The 14th century poem Pearl characterises sleep as a state where bliss can be found, even amid grief. This appreciative attitude towards sleep stands in stark contrast to our modern tendency to view sleep as unproductive time, or even a sign of laziness. Medieval people didn't feel guilty about sleeping. They saw it as a natural, necessary, and even pleasurable part of the divinely ordained rhythm of life. Medieval sleep benefited enormously from the absence of precise timekeeping devices in ordinary households. Without clocks dictating exact bedtimes and wake times, medieval people followed more natural sleep patterns guided by bodily needs, daylight, and community rhythms rather than arbitrary schedules. While bells and sundials provided general time awareness, the minute-by-minute timekeeping that characterises modern life was absent for most people. This reduced the anxiety that often surrounds modern sleep, the stress of watching the clock, calculating remaining sleep hours, or worrying about precise wake times. As historian Eviatar Zerubbabel notes in his work on the social organisation of time, the mechanical clock fundamentally transformed the human experience of time, imposing artificial precision where natural rhythms once prevailed. For medieval sleepers, this transformation had not yet occurred, allowing sleep to unfold according to natural needs rather than mechanical dictates. This freedom from precise timekeeping likely reduced what sleep researchers now call sleep onset anxiety, the stress about falling asleep that paradoxically makes sleep more difficult. Without the ability to know exactly how long they'd been trying to fall asleep, or exactly how many hours remained before morning, medieval people were spared this particular form of sleep-disrupting worry. Medieval understanding of sleep embraced natural variations in ways our standardized modern approach often doesn't. Medical texts from the period recognized that sleep needs differed based on individual constitution, age, season, and circumstances. The influential 12th century medical text Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum advised that sleep duration should vary by temperament, with those of phlegmatic constitution naturally calm and slow, requiring more sleep than those of choleric temperament, naturally energetic and quick. This personalised approach acknowledged natural human variation rather than imposing a one-size-fits-all standard. Seasonal variations in sleep duration were also accepted as natural and proper. The 13th century physician Aldebrandin of Siena wrote in his Régime du Corps that, "In winter when nights are long, it is natural and healthful to sleep longer, while in summer with its short nights, less sleep suffices." This advice recognises the body's natural tendency to adjust sleep with seasonal light changes, a flexibility often lacking in our rigidly scheduled modern lives. Age-appropriate sleep expectations also appeared in medieval texts. The 15th century health manual Tarquinum Sanitatis notes that the young require more sleep than the elderly, for their bodies grow during rest, reflecting an understanding that sleep needs change throughout the lifespan. This acceptance of natural variation likely reduced the anxiety that many modern people feel when their sleep doesn't conform to prescribed norms, anxiety that itself can worsen sleep problems. The communal nature of medieval sleep, discussed earlier regarding physical arrangements, also created a different psychological relationship with sleep. Rather than the intensely private, individualized experience sleep has become. In modern Western culture, medieval sleep was often shared and social. This communal aspect normalized sleep behaviors that might cause anxiety for modern sleepers. The sounds of others breathing, shifting position, or even snoring were expected parts of the sleep environment rather than disturbances. Historical records suggest that medieval people were generally less bothered by sleep sounds than modern sleepers, having grown accustomed to them from childhood. The shared experience of sleep also meant that natural sleep variations were more visible and thus normalized. Seeing others wake briefly during the night, shift positions, or rise for short periods would have reinforced the understanding that sleep naturally includes such variations, unlike the modern ideal of perfectly uninterrupted unconsciousness. For medieval people, sleep had spiritual significance largely absent from modern secular understanding. Sleep was viewed as a time when the soul could receive divine guidance through dreams, when angels might offer protection, and when spiritual insights might be granted. Prayer before sleep was a nearly universal practice, with specific bedtime prayers designed to place the sleeper under divine protection. The 15th century Book of Hours, a popular devotional text, includes prayers specifically for bedtime that frame sleep as a spiritual act. "Into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. Thou hast redeemed me, O Lord, thou God of truth." This spiritual dimension offered psychological comfort that likely facilitated easier sleep onset. The belief that one was protected during the vulnerable state of sleep reduced anxiety, while the ritual of prayer provided a consistent pre-sleep routine that signaled to both mind and body that it was time to rest. Dreams were also understood differently in the medieval worldview. Rather than being dismissed as meaningless neural activity or analysed through a psychological lens, dreams were often considered potential sources of spiritual insight or divine communication. This perspective gave purpose to the dream state and integrated it into the meaningful whole of life, rather than treating it as a disconnected interlude. Perhaps most significantly, medieval culture lacked the pervasive productivity guilt that haunts modern sleep. Without the capitalist emphasis on maximising every waking hour for economic productivity, medieval people didn't view sleep as wasted time that could be better spent working or consuming. The medieval workday was certainly long, especially during harvest seasons, but it was governed by natural rhythms and necessity rather than abstract productivity metrics. Work was understood as having natural limits, and rest was seen as an equally valid and necessary part of life's rhythm. The concept of sloth in medieval thought was more nuanced than modern assumptions might suggest. While idleness was indeed considered problematic, proper rest and sleep were distinguished from sloth and recognised as necessary for both physical health and spiritual well-being. As Thomas Aquinas wrote in his Summa Theologica, rest is not opposed to virtue when it serves the proper functioning of body and soul. This freedom from productivity guilt likely allowed medieval people to surrender to sleep more fully when it was appropriate, without the nagging sense that they should be doing something more productive that disrupts many modern sleepers. The medieval mindset towards sleep offers valuable insights for improving our modern relationship with rest. First, reframing sleep as a positive good rather than a necessary evil can reduce the anxiety that often surrounds modern sleep. Research in sleep psychology shows that positive attitudes towards sleep correlate with better sleep quality and reduced insomnia symptoms. Second, loosening the rigid expectations around sleep timing and duration might reduce performance anxiety about sleep. The medieval acceptance of natural variations suggests that embracing flexibility rather than enforcing strict standards might improve sleep satisfaction. Third, creating meaningful pre-sleep rituals, whether spiritual practices like prayer or secular routines that signal transition, can facilitate the psychological shift from wakefulness to sleep. The medieval practice of consistent bedtime prayers or quiet contemplation created a buffer zone between daily activities and sleep. Fourth, recognizing sleep as part of the natural rhythm of life rather than an interruption of productivity might help modern people surrender more fully to rest. Studies show that people who view sleep as intrinsically valuable rather than instrumentally necessary tend to sleep better and experience greater sleep satisfaction. As sleep psychologist Dr. Ruben Nyman suggests, much of our modern sleep disturbance stems not from physical factors, but from our broken relationship with sleep itself. We've lost the reverence for sleep that our ancestors had, and with it, some of our ability to surrender to this natural process. By reclaiming some elements of the medieval attitude towards sleep, its appreciation as a blessing, acceptance of natural variation, integration with spiritual life, and freedom from productivity guilt, modern people might heal their relationship with rest and recapture some of the sleep quality that our ancestors enjoyed. As we've journeyed through the bedchambers and sleeping habits of our medieval ancestors, a compelling picture emerges. Despite their lack of memory, foam mattresses, blackout curtains, and sleep tracking apps, medieval people likely enjoyed sleep that was more natural, more aligned with human biology, and in many ways more restful than our own technology-enhanced slumber. Their biphasic sleep pattern honoured the body's natural rhythms rather than forcing sleep into an uninterrupted block. Their genuine darkness allowed melatonin to flow unimpeded by artificial light. Their natural bedding breathed and adapted to their bodies. Their communal sleeping arrangements provided security and normalised sleep variations. Their herbal remedies gently supported natural sleep processes rather than forcing unconsciousness. Their meal timing and physical activity patterns perfectly complemented healthy sleep cycles. And perhaps most importantly, their attitude towards sleep, as a blessing to be appreciated rather than an inconvenience to be minimised, allowed them to surrender fully to rest without the anxiety that plagues modern sleepers. This is not to romanticise the past or suggest that medieval life was superior in all respects. It certainly wasn't. Disease, hardship, and shorter lifespans were realities of medieval existence. But in the specific realm of sleep, the evidence suggests that the pre-industrial, pre-electric lifestyle created nearly ideal conditions for quality rest. As sleep researcher Matthew Walker observes, in many ways, modern humans are running a grand and uncontrolled experiment on ourselves, disrupting sleep patterns that evolved over millions of years of mammalian evolution and thousands of years of human culture. The results of this experiment are increasingly clear in our epidemic of sleep disorders. Yet this historical perspective offers hope as well as critique. By understanding what made medieval sleep effective, we can selectively incorporate elements of these traditional practices into our modern lives. We need not abandon our technological comforts or medical advances to reclaim some of the sleep wisdom of our ancestors. Consider implementing these medieval-inspired practices for better modern sleep. Experiment with biphasic sleep when your schedule allows, perhaps on weekends, embracing the midnight waking as a time for quiet reflection or connection rather than fighting it as insomnia. Create a truly dark sleeping environment using blackout curtains, removing electronic devices, and covering LED indicators, approximating the darkness our ancestors took for granted. Incorporate natural materials like wool, cotton, and linen in your bedding, which offer the breathability and temperature regulation that synthetic materials often lack. Establish consistent pre-sleep rituals that signal to your body and mind that it's time to transition to rest, just as medieval prayers and quiet fireside conversations did. Try gentle herbal sleep supports like chamomile tea, valerian or lavender, which worked for centuries before pharmaceutical sleep aids existed. Shift your eating patterns to emphasize larger meals earlier in the day and lighter, simpler fare in the evening, allowing several hours for digestion before sleep. Distribute physical activity throughout your day rather than relying on intense evening workouts, and prioritize morning exposure to natural light to regulate your circadian rhythm. Most importantly, work to shift your attitude towards sleep from seeing it as downtime or lost productivity to recognizing it as an essential, valuable part of a well-lived life, a gift rather than a burden. As we face increasing rates of insomnia, sleep apnea, and other sleep disorders in our hyperstimulated, artificially lit, always connected modern world, the sleep practices of our medieval ancestors offer not just historical curiosity, but practical wisdom. Their sleep wasn't perfect by modern standards. They lacked our understanding of sleep disorders and had fewer medical interventions for genuine sleep pathologies. But their intuitive alignment with natural sleep processes created conditions that modern sleep science increasingly recognizes as optimal. Perhaps the most valuable lesson from medieval sleep is its integration into the whole of life. Not as a separate health category to be optimized, but as an integral part of the natural rhythm of existence. Sleep wasn't something medieval people worked on or hacked. It was something they lived as naturally as breathing. In our quest for better sleep, we might find that the answer lies not in more sophisticated technology or stronger medications, but in reconnecting with the natural patterns and practices that guided human sleep for centuries, patterns our medieval ancestors understood through experience and tradition, and that modern science is now rediscovering through research. The best sleep in history may indeed have occurred in medieval times, but by learning from their example, we might reclaim some of that restful heritage for ourselves, finding better sleep not by moving forward into ever more advanced sleep technology, but by remembering and honouring the wisdom of the past. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more medieval facts. See you next time.